Welcome to the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. If you're a chief executive, or if you think like one, and you want to create exponentially greater impact, then this show is for you. My name is Richard Medcalf, founder of Xquadrant. I coach some of the most successful and impressive CEOs and executive teams on the planet and help them achieve extraordinary results. And no matter how successful you've been in the past, there's always a whole new level of impact available to you. So, if you're ready to play a bigger game than ever before, I invite you to join us and become an impact multiplier CEO. Getting the information you need to understand your stakeholders can be difficult. They are often busy or unavailable, might be in the different organizations sometimes, or they might be very high up, either within your own organization or a partner or a customer, so that you might not have very much direct contact with them, if any. And so if you've got somebody, or perhaps it's a manager, asking for something, they might not always want to be questioned about the data, about the detail. They want you to come to them and work it out for yourself. So how do you get the information you need without being kicked out of the office, right? Without being kicked out of your boss's office, your boardroom, your customer, or your investor's office. And that's really what we want to get into today in season 5, episode 5 of the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. As usual in this season, which is titled From Ideas to Impact, I'm with Davina Stanley, who is a communications master or mistress, I'm not sure what you say.
Not a mistress.
Guru. You can be a communications mistress, Dav, that sounds funny. And you're from Clarity First, and as well as being a mistress of communication, you're just a generally all-round amazing communicator.
You're digging that hole, aren't you?
I'm going to go for that one. I'm going to go for that.
Own it.
I'm building your new brand for you.
I so hope not.
There you go. This is going to be one episode you're going to have to sweep under the carpet. No, this is great. So obviously, Dad, this is your expertise, right, in helping people prepare powerful communications, and data is a really key part of that, right? Because it's all very well going in to make it deliver a message, but if people are going to be asking for the detail, pushing back, wanting to know that you've done your homework, having the data is important. So. How do you do that, right? How do you make sure that you have enough data to support what might be a very strong and important recommendation that you're making?
So I think there are a couple of sides to that, Richard, and part of that is having enough data to support the recommendation, absolutely. But even before that, it's knowing what data to get to support that recommendation, which then requires us to peel the layer on the onion a little bit further and say, well, why are we communicating in the first place? Why do we actually need this? And I think particularly for fairly formal communication, which can be ad hoc, so it's not a routine paper, it's not an update, it's not something that's part of the ordinary rhythm of an organization. But let's just say the chairman of the board wants a paper on a topic because maybe they want a paper on Bitcoin or something. And so that request goes and cascades itself down the organization. And, a few layers down, somebody gets this note landing on their desk to say, in 2 weeks' time, we need a paper on Bitcoin. And so that person looks at that and says, well, okay, we're a bank, maybe that's the organization we're working within. Why do we need a paper on Bitcoin? And so the choices they've got are just to dump everything they know about Bitcoin on the paper, or to work out why they really need to write this paper on Bitcoin. And they're not somebody who has regular conversations with the chairman. So how do they go about sorting that out? And I've seen this challenge play out a number of times with clients. And so I actually spoke at length with a colleague of mine, Clement Armstrong is his name, and we had a great conversation. So I'm going to steal some of his ideas and share them all with you. How's that? So I definitely need to tribute Clem with these 3 T's that he's come up with.
So before we get into those, let me just ping back on that, because I had a conversation with somebody very similar. He said he's about 2 levels away from the chief executive, roughly. And so often things come down, the chief executive has requests, it goes down via his boss to him. And he says the issue is that at that point, it's already become a game of Chinese whispers. It's already become a guessing game. What does he actually want?
Yes.
And yet, this is running a huge, oil and gas company, right? And you can't just go and, you can't just send him an email in the culture of this company, and he's not going to, he's got other things going on. And so suddenly, he says it really is kind of almost this mind reading or guessing game of like, what the hell am I wanted? And so the number of times he's gone in and boom, this was not actually the question that what I was told is not actually the real question here.
That's it. And you can tell, when you look at the communication, so much time wasted. And, days can be wasted in trying to work this stuff out as to why do we need to write this paper and what part of Bitcoin do we need to talk about, or
and
whatever
it's a firefighting drill. Often it's like, it's needed by next week, and so everyone drops everything, they do it, and then it's the wrong deliverable.
I call it the send and scramble. The mission comes sent down from high on, up on high in the organization, and then everyone scrambles at the last minute to deliver this thing, and then it's useless. So I guess the thing is, what do we do about that? How do we avoid that scramble? And
so give me the three T's.
Three
I heard
T's.
Three T's. I like 3 T's.
There are 3 T's. Yes, exactly. So telepathy, triangulation, and timing. So they're the 3 things that I think we really need to focus on. So
excellent.
Telepathy, firstly, realize
I love telepathy. I mean, in fact, it's something I'm working on. My wife, has told me I need to read her mind a lot more often. So
good luck with that.
Yeah. Tell me about telepathy.
Good luck with that.
How do I become a master of telepathy? I'm interested.
Look, my number 1 tip with this, and I'm just going to give you one, right, is ask dumb questions. Ask the most obvious questions. And look, another one of my colleagues, I think is the best person that I've come across at this. And she has this terrible feeling of being inadequate too often. And she asks these questions and apologizes for them. And I think, no, give me more. So, when we were writing our book, the So What Strategy, we gave our team drafts and said, we'd love to know what you think. And she said, that's great. I'd love to read it and give you your feedback. That'd be terrific. But actually, shouldn't you get real people to read it? Not just people like us who know the stuff. And it's like, there's a thought. What a really excellent idea. Such a simple and obvious thing, which, is quite disarming, actually. Very, very useful. And, she would say, look, step away from the vehicle and just go and have a proper look and, think about who you really should ask about this. And I think, those sorts of really simple first principle basic questions are the right thing to ask. But, the challenge is to actually find who to ask them, which is perhaps where triangulation comes in, because with our Bitcoin example, how do you get to the chairman of the board? You can go to the company secretary, perhaps. They might have some insight. They're often a really great source of information, and they deal with the chair, so they're often quite close. Sometimes you wouldn't get to the CEO either because they're too far removed from you. So what do? Well, get to the most senior person you can and ask 3 types of questions. Backwards questions, forwards questions, and sideways questions. So backwards questions, what triggered the need for this communication? Why did it come about? Why is it needed? Who's made similar presentations in the past on this kind of topic? What have they done? And really get a sense of what's happened in the past, and either in relation to this communication or analogous communications. I think there are 2 avenues to go through there. And like I say, if it's a board thing, then I think the company secretary is a great source. But also, if it's a steering committee paper, then there's often someone who coordinates the steering committee. So you can get to somebody who has visibility over those sorts of meetings, and someone you can get access to. So I think that's something to do. Forwards questions, ask the stakeholder, that person, or as close as you can get to the actual requester. Well, if this were to happen, or how do you imagine this playing out in the future? So the Bitcoin example, well, how could Bitcoin be helping us in 3 years' time? Can you just play forward and imagine what this is going to look like for our organization? Is it going to be a big part of our portfolio? Is it a tool that we're going to use? How's that going to play out? And see if you can get them to play that through. in an extreme case, I think at Amazon, for example, they ask people to write press releases when they've got an idea that needs to go up. What's the future going to look like? That's sort of a more structured and formal way of doing that. But then sideways questions. And this is, the sorts of questions you can ask to get information without being a bit of a pest, I suppose, which is the fear, isn't it? That you ask too many questions, you become a nuisance, and then you get kicked out of the boss's office, as I said. So that's about, asking, is someone else presenting at this forum that is on a different topic, but I could perhaps just go and sit in and spectate perhaps and listen, just so you can understand the forum and the audience and so on better. And I think that's a useful thing to do, that it's not doesn't create a great impost on other people, assuming there's not a great deal of confidentiality and you can't get in the room for that sort of reason.
It's interesting. I mean, the backwards, the forwards, and the sideways. I mean, it reminds me of a framework I often use for all sorts of things is just past, present, and future, because it's like, what triggered this? What are we trying to achieve, and like what's going on in the moment. And I suppose the sideways questions, it's a bit about that, right? It's like making sure you understand, what's happening, what's going to be happening in the moment when I'm actually delivering this presentation.
Yes. Do I need to give do I need to relay my presentation again, or do I just give a quick highlight and then have a discussion? And what do discussions look like? What does the audience sort of ask? How do those things play out? It's those sorts of things sometimes that I think can be helpful in just sparking off the sort of content you need, aside of, the way you prepare and the way you deliver as well. But look, in terms of timing, should we jump to that third thing? And I think being really conscious of timing is really key, because the more senior you go, the more busy people are, but actually sometimes that's not so true. It's more that you just don't get much time with them. Everyone's pretty busy these days, I think. But sorry,
it's just interesting that timing sparked in my mind. It's actually, one of the issues when you present to very senior people is that they almost create a structure which optimizes their time, right? Because it's very rare, and there's this pyramid and hierarchy or whatever often, and therefore it just seems too difficult to help optimize everybody else's time, right? And therefore, in a sense, they've kind of almost made a trade-off, which is that we're just going to say basically what we want, and we hope it's going to happen. It can backfire, because then they end up with presentations which aren't delivering on what they need actually, right? It feels quick at the time because it's like, we're just going to tell them this thing and we'll get on with other stuff and they can figure it out.
Correct.
But one thing I say, and I know it's a bit different from what you want to get to, but I suppose it's an important point, I think, which is this question of even just as you prepare for these meetings, I think the deeper game is, are you committed to delivering the best outcome for the business, or are you just focused on like your own reputation and self-preservation and not screwing up? So because if you're in the latter, then actually you won't really ask the hard questions, you won't try to get the data, you won't do this work, and you'll kind of try to do what you think is the easiest and the least
minimum
annoying,
necessary.
The least annoying for other people, and so forth. But actually, if you're kind of committed to like, okay, it's actually really important that the bank understands about Bitcoin because it's generally important, and therefore the way I can be of biggest service right now is to absolutely make my point and get it across. Then the way that you show up, the way that you interact, you suddenly you're on a mission. And
absolutely.
that comes through. And so I know it's a bit out of subject compared with the data gathering, but I've just seen it time and time again. It's like when you're presenting to people who are more senior, or they have more power, or they're or they're external, and they might be a peer, but they're in a key customer. It's like the temptation is to fall back on kind of defensiveness, like, let me avoid making a mess of myself, making a mess of it. Whereas actually, it's like serve the people you're presenting to.
Yes.
and push past those mental barriers that get in the way.
Yes. And I think that, to your point, though, people can be quite intimidated by the idea of actually going to get the information that they need to tell the right story. And they get caught in a bit of a trap, actually, in that sort of mid-level in the organization, where they follow the template and they fill in the template and just spray information out there rather than being really focused. And I think in all of our conversations on this topic, from ideas to impact, we've been talking about focusing our thinking around a single idea and having a small number of supports, which at a superficial level is almost a platitude, because I think a lot of people say that, but having a structure and really focusing very tightly around the synthesis and the relationships between those ideas and really being committed to those ideas, I think is the key thing. So, but I think you were also talking there about showing up. And I think we have to show up to those meetings to get the information we need and prepare for those, so we don't waste those mid-level to senior people's time. And,
Yeah, exactly. And so tell me about the timing element, right? So obviously, because that is, you say, is a part of when you're showing up, right? How, so how do you,
how do you deal with that?
When do you do these tasks, right? How do you?
Well, I think firstly you read them carefully to judge how engaged they are in the moment with you, and try and, not overstay your welcome. So if you can see, even if you need more information and they're switching off because maybe they've had a tough day, or it's the end of the day or something like that, and you can see that they're just distracted and so on, then I think you just cut and run. You don't overburden them unless you really, really have to. You find another way to solve it.
I find asking permission and also giving options is a good way. So asking permission is like, would you have 5 minutes? I have 2 questions to ask about this.
Absolutely.
That makes it go, okay, it's only 5 minutes and it's only 2 questions. It's not 20 questions.
But be disciplined and stick to that.
Exactly. And then the other one is, I have 2 questions. Would you have 3 minutes now to answer those, or would it be better to do it next week? So you give people an easy out, rather than actually, frankly, they're distracted, but they'll say yes just because they know it needs to happen. At least you give them an option.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to do, because you're giving them permission, and in giving them permission, you're actually probably going to get what you want more easily too. No, I think that's a great thought. And I think, though, in getting this sort of information, sometimes it can be quite sensitive. So be very aware of your context as well. And that's part of reading the body language, because perhaps there are some people behind you that you can't see in the open plan office that shouldn't be hearing the conversation. So be very careful where you ask some of these questions, because the topic could be sensitive, and just be mindful of your physical situation. Pick a time of day. Try not to grab them as you see them walking out the door, unless you intend to stand in the lift with them to get the information you need, which is a strategy, by the way. That's fine. But if they look like they're racing out the door, unless you're racing with them, leave it till later. And then perhaps the cheeky one that I've found to be really effective is a little bit counterintuitive, and that's to ask what I call a Camelot question. So that's at the very end of, at the end, you're just sort of wrapping up, and it's clear that you're wrapping up, but then you ask a question. And often it's this sort of question that has occurred to you toward the end of the conversation, and it is often the killer question, actually. And for some reason, that seems to really work. And I'm not sure whether that's just circumstance that the conversations have evolved to that point. So the synapses in the brain sort of click together for both you and the person you're getting the information from, but it seems to work quite well. Do you mind if I just ask one more question before we wrap? I know I only said 2 questions, but something else has just occurred to me. Could I ask that? And that seems to be, quite effective, so long as they're not racing out the door to grab children from school or something like that. Be careful, but it can be a useful strategy as well. So 3 things: telepathy, triangulation, and timing. I think being mindful of those strategies, and also those limitations, timing being a bit of a limitation. I think if you've got those in mind, it'll help you get what you need, so you can have that focused conversation and then deliver really focused communication as well.
Yeah, I think I love those points. I mean, telepathy, just the point that it doesn't exist, and actually we're going to have to be comfortable with some ambiguity in this, but we can do our homework. The triangulation is that I think that the backwards, forward, sideways, or past, present, future, is a way of kind of really trying to get as many data points as we can about the contexts. And then as well, the timing is making sure that as you gather the data, you are thinking about the moment in which you're asking the data, right? And kind of really tuning into the other person and what they actually need in the moment as well, and what's on their mind. And then that final point, I think we just added it in around that sense of the commitment that you decide to make to this piece of communication as a way to perhaps get yourself out of some of the fears that can actually hold you back about getting information. I think, which is important, because
just
again,
front-footing it.
You can play it safe, and you can or you can be timid, but you'll probably end up in a moderate piece of communication. Or you can say, what do I really need to serve these people? And then that gets you over the hill. So
blast through being bland, avoid being bland.
There we go, blast through being bland. Perfectly. So there you go. It's been a fun conversation. Next time, I love your title for this. It's how to collaborate on a piece of communication without playing red pen ping pong. It's a tongue twister.
It is, but I hope by the sound of that you know what I mean. And it's a terrible game, and I wish I could show this slide to you, but it's one that I was looking at that a client was working on this week, and I think I can probably at some point use the comments, not the actual document, but the comments, and just looking at this and the sorts of things that end up in this red pen ping pong. It's just awful, awful. It's such a game we don't want to play.
Well, we'll get into that next time, and look forward to that. It'll be a fun discussion.
Fabulous.
Thanks again. Really, really great insights, and see you next time on the next episode.
Look forward to it, Richard.
Goodbye.
If you've been enjoying this series, you may like some more ideas that will help you communicate with impact, especially if you're dealing with complex material. My free course, How to Communicate with Impact, does just that. In this course, I cover 4 areas. How to get faster, more useful responses to your communication. Secondly, how your audiences really read your communication. Thirdly, how to communicate the right amount of detail. And finally, how to communicate powerful insights that cut through. So you can access this course by using this link, www.clarityfirstprogram.com/impact-podcast. I hope you find this useful and look forward to bringing more ideas to you through our upcoming podcasts. Thanks so much, and bye for now.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation. Now let's talk about you. When you're in top leadership, when you're in the biggest role of your career, who supports you at a deep level as you lead others? Who helps you multiply your impact and get to the next level? If you're ready to learn more about our content, our coaching, and our community, then visit us at xquadrant.com.